So I thought it would be useful to maybe look at an example of where these principles and questions are useful to think about in a sort of corporate setting. Look at the question of what is good customer behavior. So the specific thing we're going to look at is wellness programs. So a growing number of companies are developing or implementing some sort of wellness program globally, and there's a whole range of reasons for doing that. I think part of it is companies now have a lot of pressure to act in a sort of socially responsible way, and those programs range in depth from education to giving people information and scores and things, to giving them incentives, and are integrated into businesses to different degrees, but there's a lot of them being developed and that are developed are being evolved, and it's across different spaces. So there's physical wellness and financial wellness and mental wellness. It's a very large sort of focus area at the moment, and I think potentially a question that doesn't get thought enough about when people are designing these programs is what you need to consider about good behavior. Like this broader question that we're asking of what is good behavior? How does everything that Jess spoke about, how can that inform your design of the wellness program? And, of course, there are many different factors that go into the design of a wellness program, and there are a lot of criteria that you need to satisfy, and it depends on the aims of the business and why they're actually building this wellness program. And it's a complicated thing to do, but I do think that part of it should be thinking about what do we mean when we're talking about good behavior. So I think in our experience, almost always when designing a wellness program, people will take the universal truth approach, and it starts from the point of saying that good behavior is performing actions that are good for you because it's a wellness program, and we as a program are going to specify what is good for you as a universal truth. And it is similar in a way to the spaces and environments discussion that we were talking about, in that, and I mean, people don't have to come into your space. It's generally an opt-in sort of thing, but you are the authority in the space setting those rules for good behavior. And I think it's important to think about, just think about the fact that you are taking this approach of saying there is a universal view of good behavior, and being aware that potentially you are selecting that universal view given your context. I think one of the interesting things that Jess was showing is that there are so many potential universal truths, and I think it's easy to select the one that best fits with your context. And it's worth thinking about this universally true principle that we're putting down. Is that going to be the right universal truth to use as the basis for our program? Because when you're building a wellness program, the whole thing really builds off your definition of what is good behavior. I think probably the easiest example is if you're doing a physical wellness program and you want to say to people they need to eat healthily. There are so many different views and versions of what that could mean, and the decision that you make can have a really big impact on how your program looks and what your wellness program is incentivizing. And as the authority figure in that space, you're really, creating the rules and have, I think, a degree of responsibility around the good behavior that you are driving. So there is also, that's the universal approach. There is, I guess, a view you can take of, what more contextual sociological approach would be around, and there are programs that do this around letting people set their own goals. So you do still have to, you can do it to the degree that you want. Like you could maybe say set your own goal on this measure, or just set your own goals and we will help you and encourage you and help you along the way to achieving it. But you must define what good behavior is given your context. Like I said, I think it's worth being aware when you sort of thinking about these programs, which approach you're taking. It's worth being aware of what sort of approach you're taking and the implications that has. Another interesting thing to think about in terms of good behavior is what Jess was talking about with good intentions paving the road to hell. And I think where that comes through in these wellness programs is how do you consider outcomes versus actions? So what I mean by that is if someone is behaving well but isn't actually well, that they're doing what you define as good behavior, but they haven't actually reached that point of wellness, what do you do in that situation? And are you defining good behavior as being well or as acting in a way to get you towards well? One example could be, there could be someone who is eating healthily but has some sort of genetic predispositions or conditions, and actually their health costs are pretty high. For your business, if someone has no health costs, there's a health costs going down. And, it's fine to make that trade-off. It is a program. Just building these programs, you have to optimize against a number of factors, but it's worth being aware of the fact that you are then saying that, outcomes are more important than intentions to a degree. Another example would be, is it more important that someone is saving every month or that they have a lot of savings? And what happens if someone is saving every month and then, the reason that you save is to have some sort of buffer. There's long-term savings as well, but generally, the first reason that you save is to have a buffer against some unexpected expense coming up, right? So what happens if someone has that unexpected every month and then their car breaks down and they pay for it, but then they don't have a lot of total savings anymore? How do you consider that person as someone who is behaving well? And I think these are all important questions that you have to, and so Jess was saying, putting these as open philosophical questions, but I think the hard thing about building out these programs is you actually have to pick an answer, and there's not necessarily one right way of doing it, and you decide, given the context in which you're doing, which way is preferable and would work best given your situation and your customer's context and everything like that.
Sorry, Eric, you lost me a little bit there, but I was thoroughly getting into it, and then we've gone from a customer. You're saying how does your actions in front of a customer, and then you've gone on to, it sounds like you're saying that an organization needs to reward me to have a wellness center for being good. I'm sorry, I don't know if anybody else, I was following it and then suddenly you lost me. We're talking about how does, in the front of a customer, there's somebody that I deal with, and then it's sounding like there's a reward for if I do well at work, then I'm going to have a wellness center as an incentive. I'm sorry, I'm lost. Hope you don't mind me just jumping in.
So I think, so we're saying if the situation we're talking about is if you are a company and you want to encourage customers to behave well, what should you be thinking about in terms of defining good behavior? How does it relate to this discussion, or how can we pull in the points that Jess was raising and the questions that she was asking in order to answer this question of how do we get customers to behave better? And when I spoke about rewards, it's just because that is one of the mechanisms you can use, but you don't need to. It's not important. I think what is more important is how do you think about these questions that Jess was asking in the context of trying to change a customer's behavior in order for them to be more well. And what I was trying to say on this slide in particular was that you need to think about how important you think intentions are versus outcomes in terms of encouraging someone to be well and to behave in a good way, however you define that. So do you define good being having good intentions or good having good outcomes? And
outcomes, definitely outcomes, because customers are make demands and want you to do everything, you deliver, but then they don't respond. So for me, a customer needs to give. I need an outcome from a customer, which then comes into a form as reward for me, be it commission or success or status or whatever the case is. I definitely need an outcome from a customer.
Yeah, so I think it can depend on the context that you're acting in. So I think it sounds like for you it's very clear that the outcome is the most important thing. If someone is They really want to give you an outcome. And that's so not in your context, but I'm sure you can imagine in a different context. If someone is trying really hard to give you an outcome, and for some reason beyond their control it doesn't work out, are they then, in your context they are, but there are so many different situations in which this can happen that it's just worth thinking about, how do you think about it,
I don't know if it's behaving badly. If there's no value for the customer in something, it's not behaving. Remember, it can be broken down into multiple facets, from financial remuneration, credibility, legacy, brand, whatever. I don't think it's going to be bad. It's just, we didn't come to an arrangement, so it doesn't mean he's behaving badly.
Yeah. Exactly, but and then you need to think about. So if you do have like some incentive structure or program or something where doesn't work out, you're saying that person didn't behave badly. What does that mean in terms of your interactions with them, because you didn't get the outcome?
I chastise them and lock them up in a dark room with duct tape. I don't know.
Put them in a panopticon until they give you the result.
A sensory deprivation tank. I don't know.
So then, I think the last piece, and this is more for dealing with consumers. So as a corporate dealing with consumers, so you say you're a bank or an insurance company, and you're wanting to encourage good behavior. So you've answered all of these different questions. We know what we think good behavior is, or what we're going to say good behavior is, and what we want to incentivize. It can then be very difficult to, and there's a range of different ways, or with trade-offs, of how you can find evidence of behavior in people's interaction data with you, and there's different, like I said, trade-offs in the approach that you choose. And the first one is that it's easy to quantify good behavior from the data that you have available, and that's great and exciting, but it doesn't often. So another option is you could use self-reporting using surveys. The downside is that you're probably not going to get that many people answering, and if they do answer, you need to adjust for how much you trust what they're saying. Especially in a good behavior space, people tend to over-report how well they're quite consistently. So you can adjust for that, but you need to somehow figure out what that adjustment should. You can't say, almost assume that if someone's justification for doing it's actually not going to be completely true as well. So you have to make that trade-off of how willing are you to get it wrong, how wrong will it be, how many of the dimensions can you measure. Or you can look for other proxies of good behavior in the data. So someone we believe that someone who's behaving well will have this sort of characteristic, and we can see that. Because you need to be able to say why you're using this proxy. Is it an internal measure? How explainable and justifiable does it need to be? And then the last option is to build models to approximate the data that you don't have on good behavior. So to either use some sort of training set or expert knowledge to build out some training set and use a modeling approach to approximate good behavior using missing data. I think that's